The wind in the high plains of Wyoming Territory was a constant, high scream. It never stopped, not for dark or for dawn, and it scoured the land down to the bone. It was a miserable sound, the kind that frayed a man's nerves and drove women to madness. But Lena found it a comfort. It drowned out the noise in her head. She rode into the town of Chalk Ridge on a horse that was dead lame, its head drooping with every pained step. The animal, a good mare she'd stolen 2 weeks back, had favored its left foreleg for the last 10 miles, and now it was a hitching, agonizing limp. Lena knew the feeling. She pulled the thin wool coat tighter. The garment was worn, the elbows thin, but it was thick enough to hide the map of bruises that started at her ribs and snaked down her hips. She called herself Sarah now. Lena was a name that belonged to another life, a name that had been spoken too many times in a low, proprietary whisper. Sarah was nobody. Sarah was just a woman passing through. Chalk Ridge was not a town. It was an insult, a handful of squat, unpainted buildings huddled together as if for warmth against the relentless wind. The land around it was all chalky cliffs and wide, empty brown skies that promised nothing but more dust. The wind choked the air with that dust, stinging her eyes and caking her lips. She had $1.40 in her boot. Her stolen revolver, heavy and cold, was pressed against the small of her back. She dismounted in front of the livery, the horse groaning in relief. She stroked its neck, her hand trembling slightly from cold and hunger. "I'm sorry, girl," she whispered. She sold the horse and the saddle to the liveryman for $8. It was robbery, but she was in no position to bargain. The man looked at the mare's leg, then at Lena, and spat a stream of tobacco. He knew. With $9.40 to her name, she walked toward the only building that looked alive, the Dead Coyote Saloon. The bat-wing doors slapped shut behind her, cutting off the shriek of the wind and replacing it with a wall of noise. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer, unwashed men, and the sharp tang of cheap whiskey. A piano in the corner was being beaten, not played. She kept her head down, moving toward the bar. A few men looked up, their eyes raking over her, but she offered them nothing. She was not prey, not anymore. The man behind the bar was thick, bald, and wiping a glass with a rag that looked dirtier than the floor. "What'll it be?" he grunted. "A job." He stopped wiping. He looked at her. He saw the dust, the worn coat, the exhaustion. He probably saw the desperation, too, but she hoped he saw the hardness underneath it. "We ain't hiring girls. Got 4 already." "I don't want to be a girl," Lena said, her voice quiet but carrying. "I want to wash glasses, sweep this floor. It's filthy." One of the saloon girls, a blonde in a tired red dress, laughed from a nearby table. "Got claws, this one?" The bartender, whose name she'd later learned was Silas, grunted, 50 cents a day. You find your own board. You start now." "I need a place to sleep tonight." Silas pointed a thick thumb toward the ceiling. "Room in the back attic. Cost you $4 a week. I take it from your pay. You eat the scraps the men leave." It was still robbery. "Fine," Lena said. She took off her coat, folded it carefully, and placed it behind the bar. She kept the revolver where it was. Silas handed her the gray, damp rag. "Start with the glasses." The other girls watched her. They were wary. She was not one of them. She didn't have the easy, broken smile they all wore. She was quiet, efficient, and she never, ever looked a man in the eyes. They saw her as competition, or perhaps as a ghost of some future they all feared. They left her alone. She worked for 3 days. 3 days of washing, sweeping, and listening. The dust never settled. The coyote howls at night sounded like grieving children, and the nights were so cold her breath fogged in the tiny attic room. She listened to the men, to the gossip, to the rhythms of Chalk Ridge, and she heard about Colt Maddox. He was not a man, according to the whispers. He was a shadow. He worked a remote ranch 20 miles north, guarding some rich Easterners' cattle from rustlers. But it was his past that made the townsfolk drop their voices. "Killed 3 men in Kansas," one freighter whispered to another over a game of faro. "Just 3? I heard it was 5. 3, the first man insisted, and never said a word after. Not a plea, not a curse, just silence. Watched 'em all bleed out and didn't even blink. What was it over? Who knows? A card game, a woman, a horse, with a man like Maddox. It don't matter the reason. He's just a trigger waiting to be pulled. Lena filed the name away. Chalk Ridge was full of men who thought they were dangerous. She had just escaped one who hid his violence behind a holy book. On her 4th day, Colt Maddox came to town. He was there to collect supplies for the ranch. He tied his horse, a big roan, to the hitching post outside the general store, not the saloon. Lena was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the dead coyote, the wind tearing at her skirts and whipping her hair across her face. She saw him. He was tall, broader than she expected. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a hat pulled low, casting his face in shadow. He didn't saunter. He didn't swagger. He just moved, deliberate and heavy, like a man who knew his own weight. She stopped sweeping to watch him. There was nothing remarkable about him, and yet everything was. He was the quietest thing she had ever seen. The town seemed to flow around him, like water splitting around a dark, unmovable rock. People gave him space. They didn't greet him. They just got out of his way. He went into the general store. Lena went back to sweeping, but her eyes kept straying to the door. He came out an hour later, carrying a heavy crate of tinned goods on one shoulder as if it were a pillow. He loaded it onto a supply wagon parked nearby. He had to pass her to get back to his horse. She kept her head down, sweeping the same patch of dirt over and over. She felt his presence before she saw him. He was a block of cold air, a void in the day's weak light. He stopped. She didn't look up, but her hands tightened on the broom handle. The sweeping stopped. She could feel his eyes on her. It was not the greasy, assessing look of the patrons. It was not the cold, dead-eyed look of the liveryman. It was something else. It was still. It was patient. He was just looking, seeing the new girl, the worn dress, the way her knuckles were white on the broom. She raised her head. His face was hard, cut from the same rock as the cliffs. A thick, dark beard covered his jaw, but it was his eyes that held her. They were a flat, cold gray, like a winter sky. And the rumors were true. They were silent. They held no malice, no interest, no warmth, just an empty, unreadable stillness. He noticed her. He noticed her watching him. He held her gaze for 1 second. 2. Then, he nodded once. A short, sharp dip of his chin that wasn't a greeting. It was just an acknowledgement. "I see you." And then he turned and walked to his horse, mounted, and led the wagon out of town, heading north. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart was hammering, not with fear, but with something else. Recognition. That night, the saloon was loud. A crew of cattle drovers had come in, flush with pay and mean with whiskey. Lena kept to the shadows, collecting glasses, her body aching. One of the drovers, a big man with a red, sweating face, cornered her by the stairs. "Where you been hidin', little mouse?" he slurred. Grabbing her arm, Lena froze. The hand, the grip, the smell of whiskey and sweat. Suddenly, she was not in Wyoming. She was in a canvas tent in Nebraska, the air thick with incense and false piety. "You are filth, Lena." Ezekiel Grant's voice was a silver blade, smooth and beautiful as he preached to the kneeling crowd. "But I will cleanse you. I will wash you in the blood." His hand on her arm, his thumb pressing into the soft flesh until she wanted to scream. The other hand, the one that held the good book during the day, was tangled in her hair, pulling her head back. A wife must be obedient, my dear. A wife must submit to her husband's correction. It is God's law. He was not her husband. The papers were a lie. The whole traveling ministry was a lie, a way to collect tithes and women. He was a holy man with a violent grip, a silver tongue that promised salvation and delivered pain. The bruises on her hips were his sermons. "Lena, such a beautiful, sinful name. I will call you Penance." "Let go of me," she whispered. In the saloon, in the tent, The drover laughed. "Got some fight, do you? I like fight." He yanked her arm. A shadow moved from the back of the room. Lena hadn't even seen him come in. Colt Maddox was back. He hadn't left with the wagon. He didn't speak. He didn't shove. He simply walked up and placed his hand on the drover's wrist. The drover turned, his face a mask of drunken rage. "Get your hand off me, you—" The words died. Colt just looked at him. His gray eyes were not empty now. They were full of something cold and final. He applied pressure. Lena watched, fascinated. Colt's hand was huge, rough, scarred. It was a hand that had built fences and buried men. He just squeezed. The drover's face went from red to white. His fingers uncurled from Lena's arm. A glass he'd been holding in his other hand slipped and shattered on the floor. I ain't," the drover stammered. Colt squeezed harder. The man's knees buckled. He went down, gasping, clutching his wrist. Colt looked at the man on the floor for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his table in the corner, picking up his glass of water. Not whiskey, water. The saloon was silent, save for the gasping of the drover. Lena rubbed her arm. She was shaking. Not from the drover. From him. She picked up the broken glass. She walked to his table. He was looking into his water, his face unreadable. She stood there until he looked up. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was hoarse. Colt Maddox stared at her. The silence stretched. He looked at her arm, then at her face. He gave another one of those short, sharp nods, cold, dismissive. He had not saved her. He had simply removed an obstacle. She felt a reckless, angry spark. She was tired of being saved, tired of being hurt, tired of being silent. She leaned down, just a fraction. "You always so chivalrous. Cowboy?" she asked. Her voice low. A taunt. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He just held her gaze. "Don't talk to me," he said. His voice was a low rasp, like rocks grinding together. It was the first time she'd heard it. He shut her down. But it wasn't cruel. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement, a boundary, a wall. He was telling her he wasn't her savior. He wasn't her friend. He was nothing. Lena straightened. She almost smiled. A wall. She could understand. A wall she could break. It was the silver-tongued promises that killed you. She nodded, mocking his own gesture. "Fine," she said, and she walked away. That night, in her freezing attic room, she pulled the small, cracked mirror from her bag. She lit a candle. She unbuttoned her dress. The wool slid away. And she looked. The drover's grip had been nothing. He was an amateur. Ezekiel's work was still there. The dark purple shadows on her ribs. The yellowing, ugly stain over her hip bone, where he had pressed the spine of his Bible into her, over and over. "Casting out the demon of defiance." She touched the worst of them. The skin was cold. She thought of the drover's entitled rage. She thought of Ezekiel's holy violence, and she thought of Colt Maddox, his silent, brutal efficiency, his cold, unreadable eyes. "Don't talk to me." He was dangerous. He was broken. He was, perhaps, the most honest thing in this entire, God-forsaken territory. Lena stared at her reflection. She saw the bruises. She saw the fear underneath the anger. She whispered to the girl in the glass, the girl who was half Lena, half Sarah, "I won't be afraid again." It was not a prayer. It was a promise. She blew out the candle and lay down in the dark. The sound of the wind and the coyote howls her only lullaby. Colt Maddox left the next morning before the sun had troubled the horizon. Lena, awake in her cold attic room, heard the rattle of the supply wagon's wheels over the hard, frozen mud of the street. She had not slept. His words, "Don't talk to me," echoed in her head, not as a rejection, but as a challenge. He was a locked door. She was a woman who had learned how to pick locks. She worked the day in a haze. The saloon was quieter. The drovers gone, leaving behind only the sticky residue of their wages and the smell of stale regret. Silas, the bartender, was in a foul mood, which meant he was marginally more communicative than usual. complaining about the cost of rise and the cheapness of freight hands. Lena just nodded, scrubbed, and kept her silence. She expected the quiet to last. She expected the town to settle back into its dusty rhythm. She did not expect to see the big roan horse tied outside the livery again, just as the sun was bleeding a weak orange into the vast, indifferent sky. But there it was, and there was the wagon. Its back left wheel splintered, the axle snapped clean. She finished her work, her hands raw from lye soap and scalding water. The other girls, Hattie, Pearl, and May, were preening by the stove, getting ready for the night's meager pickings. They still treated her like a stray dog, too weary to bite but too strange to pet. "That big quiet fella's back," Hattie said, painting her mouth with a stub of carmine. "Axel broke 2 miles out. He walked back. Heard he's sleeping in Silas's barn," May added, fluffing her hair. "Too proud for a room at the boarding house, I reckon?" "Or too broke," Pearl sniffed. "He ain't broke," Hattie said, her voice dropping. "He just ain't right. Gives me a chill." Lena said nothing. She took her small plate of leftover beans and bread, her payment for the day, and slipped out the back door into the biting cold. The barn was set 50 yards behind the saloon. It was old, the wood silvered and warped. A faint line of yellow light glowed from a crack in the door. She ate her beans standing in the alley, the wind whipping her hair. She told herself to go up to her room. She told herself that man was his own business. He was a wall. He was a block of ice. He was not her concern, but she knew what it was to be stranded. She knew what it was to be cold and alone, with only your own dark thoughts for company. She finished the bread and wiped her hands on her skirt. She walked to the barn. The door wasn't locked. She slipped inside, her soft-soled boots making no sound on the dirt floor. The barn was warmer than outside, filled with the sweet, dry smell of hay and the musky scent of animals. A single lantern hung from a beam, casting deep, dancing shadows. He was there, in the corner, sitting on a hay bale, his back to the wall. He was not sleeping. He was sharpening a knife. It was a big knife, a skinning knife, the blade long and curved. He held it with an unnerving stillness, his left hand holding the whetstone, his right drawing the blade across it in a slow, rhythmic, whispering scrape. Shh, shh, shh. The sound filled the barn. He wore his sheepskin coat, but his hat was off. His hair was dark, thick, and in need of a cut. The lantern light caught the hard lines of his face, his brow furrowed in concentration. He knew she was there. He had known the second the door latch clicked. But he didn't stop. He didn't look up. He just continued. Shh, shh, shh. Lena stood for a full minute, just watching. He was all angles and shadows, a creature of the cold and the dark. He was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. And that included Ezekiel Grant. Ezekiel's danger was wrapped in sweetness and light, like poison in honey. This man, he was just the poison. Honest, pure. She was not afraid. She was tired of being afraid. "You always this quiet, Cowboy?" Her voice cut the silence. The shh stopped. He did not start. He did not jolt. He simply lifted his head, and his gray eyes found her in the gloom. He looked at her, his face a mask of stone. The knife was perfectly still in his hand. She walked closer, stopping 10 feet away. "Or is it just me you don't like talking to?" He watched her. He was sizing her up, the way a wolf sizes up a deer, trying to decide if it's a threat, or food, or just a distraction. She crossed her arms, a gesture of defiance, but it also served to hug her thin dress closer. "That drover's wrist," she said. "It's broke." Heard him screaming all the way to the doctor's house. Colt said nothing. His gaze was heavy. "You did that," she pressed. "For me." "No," he said. The word was a rumble, like rocks moving. "No?" He was loud. "I was drinking my water." Lena almost smiled. "So you'd have done it even if I wasn't there?" "Probably. I don't believe you." She took another step. He was a statue, only his eyes moved, tracking her. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was flat. "Nothing. Just curious. A man who kills 3 men and doesn't say a word. A man who breaks another man's wrist over a glass of water. A man who tells a woman, "Don't talk to me." She shook her head. "You're not like other men. Colt Maddox?" A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Go back to the saloon, girl. My name is Sarah." He did not acknowledge it. "Go." "Why?" she dared. "Are you afraid I'll talk you to death?" He finally spoke. He set the knife and the stone down on the bale next to him, very deliberately. He looked at his scarred, rough hands. Then he looked back at her. "Only when I don't know what you want." His voice was low, steady. It was not a question. It was not an accusation. It was the truest thing anyone had said to her in a year. He didn't know what she wanted. Ezekiel had always told her what she wanted, what God wanted, what he wanted. They were always the same thing. This man, he was waiting. The honesty of it hit her like a fist. "And what if you knew?" she whispered. "Then I'd know." She was trembling. It was the cold. It was him. It was the sudden, terrifying realization that this man, this killer, was giving her a choice. She tested him. She moved before she could think better of it. She closed the distance between them, stepped right inside his space, close enough to feel the heat coming off his body. She raised a hand, her fingers small and pale against the dark wool of his coat. She laid her hand on his forearm. He did not move. He did not breathe. He just froze. She could feel the muscle under her hand, hard as iron, bunched and waiting. He was coiled. A spring tightened to the breaking point, but he did not pull away. He did not shove her. He just let her touch him. She looked up into his face. His eyes were no longer cold. They were burning. He was looking at her hand on his arm as if it were a branding iron. "What do you want?" he asked again. And this time his voice was not flat. It was rough, strained. Lena didn't know. She felt a sudden, dizzying wave of power. He was bigger, stronger, faster. He could break her in half, and he was letting her touch him. She also felt a wave of terror. What if she was wrong? His stillness was not peace. It was a cage. Colt Maddox was not a quiet man. He was a violent man holding himself in check with chains forged in some dark, cold place. He was 15 years old. His mother, Elora, was a soft woman, all pale hands and sad smiles, married to a man who called himself a deputy marshal. The man was a drunk, and his badge was just an excuse to use his fists. Colt had watched it all his life. He had watched his mother cover the bruises on her neck with scarves. He had watched her flinch when a door slammed. He had watched her lie to the neighbors. "I'm just clumsy," is all. That night, the marshal was drunker than usual. He had lost his pay at cards. He came home roaring. Colt, lying on his cot in the lean-to, heard the first slap. It was a sound he knew better than his own name. He heard his mother cry out, "Please, Jed, not tonight, please." You telling me what to do? Woman? The thud of a fist against her body. A grunt. Something in Colt snapped. He had been cleaning the marshal's guns that afternoon. He had left the man's heavy Colt revolver, the .45, on the kitchen shelf. He moved. He was no longer a boy. He was a purpose. He walked into the main room. His mother was on the floor. Her lips split, blood in her blonde hair. The marshal, Jed, was unbuckling his belt. His eyes glazed with whiskey and rage. "Get to bed, boy," Jed slurred. Colt didn't move. He just looked at his mother on the floor. "I said, get to bed, you little bastard, or you'll get the same." The marshal raised his belt. Colt raised the revolver. He had to use both hands to steady it. It was so heavy. "You touch her again," Colt said, and his voice was a stranger's, a low rasp. "And I will kill you." Jed stopped. He blinked. Then he laughed, a deep, ugly sound. "You ain't got the sand, boy." He turned back to Elora. He swung the belt. The gunshot was deafening in the small cabin. Jed looked down at his chest. A dark, spreading stain. He looked at Colt, his eyes wide with surprise. Then he fell. Colt's mother screamed. Colt did not speak. He lowered the gun. He walked over to his mother, helped her to her feet, and led her out of the cabin, stepping over the body of the man he had just killed. He was 15. He hadn't said a word at the trial. He hadn't said a word when they'd called it self-defense, a justifiable shooting. He hadn't said a word when his mother, her face bruised, had told the judge that Jed had tripped and fallen on the gun. He had just been silent. He had buried the boy and become the wall. Now, a woman's hand was on his arm, and the wall was cracking. Lena saw the shift in his eyes. She saw the pain, the darkness. She snatched her hand back as if burned. I'm sorry, she stammered. He blinked. The shadow passed. He was just a man in a barn again. "You're Axel," she said, her voice shaking. "Is it bad?" He nodded. "Need a new wheel. Silas is sending for one. 2 days, maybe 3. "Oh." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Well, I'll let you get back to your knife." She turned to flee. "Sarah?" She stopped, her back to him. "Your hand," he said. She looked down. Her knuckles were red and raw. "Lye soap," she said. "It's just the soap." He stood up. He was so tall. He walked to a crate and opened a tin. He scooped out a thick, yellowish grease. He walked to her. He didn't ask. He just took her hand. It was not a grab. It was not rough. He just took it. His hand was huge, calloused, and surprisingly warm. He rubbed the axle grease into her raw knuckles, his thumb moving in slow, gentle circles. It was the most tender thing that had ever happened to her. She stared at his dark head, bent over her hand. She was not breathing. He finished. He let her go. "Stops the crackin'," he mumbled. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, her throat tight. He turned and went back to his hay bale, picking up the knife. "Shh, shh, shh." Lena fled. They didn't speak for 2 days. He was a ghost. He took his meals in the barn, or at the back table of the saloon, eating quickly, his head down. He watched her. She felt his eyes on her, a physical weight, every time she crossed the room. On the 3rd night, the saloon was rowdy again. A different crew, a different fight. This one was not about her. It was over a card game. A chair was thrown. A man pulled a knife. Colt was at his table, drinking his water. He didn't move until the knife wielder backed into him, spilling his glass. Colt stood up. It was over in 5 seconds. He did not hit the man. He disassembled him. A block to the wrist, a twist of the arm, a shove that sent the man crashing into the bar. Senseless. Colt looked at his water, then at the man. He seemed annoyed. He paid for his meal and left. Lena saw him in the alley an hour later, leaning against the saloon wall, his head back, staring at the stars. She brought out a wet rag and a bottle of whiskey. He looked at her, wary. "Your hand," she said. He looked down. His knuckles were bleeding. He hadn't even hit the man. He had blocked the knife, and the man's own momentum had done the rest. "It's fine. You're a terrible liar," she said. She grabbed his hand. He let her. She sat on an empty keg and began to clean the wound, pouring whiskey over the broken skin. He hissed, but didn't pull away. "You're good at this," he said. It was the longest sentence he'd offered her. "I'm good at patching things up," she said, her voice bitter. She wrapped his hand in a strip of clean cloth from her apron. He was watching her, his eyes unreadable in the dark. "Who was he?" She froze. "Who?" "The man you're running from." Her blood went cold. "I'm not running. I'm traveling." "You're running," he stated. "You look at every door like it's a trap. You flinch when a man raises his voice. You're running." She tied off the bandage, her movements jerky. "You don't know anything about me." "I know that." He reached out, his bandaged hand moving slow. He didn't touch her face. He just brushed a stray piece of hair, whipped loose by the wind, from her cheek. His rough fingers barely grazed her skin. She recoiled. She couldn't help it. He pulled his hand back, his face closing, the wall slamming back into place. I have to get back to work," she said, and ran inside. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her attic room felt like a coffin. She hated him. She hated him for seeing her. She hated him for being gentle. She hated Ezekiel for making her flinch from a simple touch. She was shaking with a rage so cold it burned. She was tired of being clean. She was tired of being good. She was tired of being afraid. She got up. She didn't put on her coat. She walked barefoot down the stairs, through the silent saloon, and out the back door. The wind was high. The barn door was shut. She opened it and stepped inside. He was asleep, or pretending to be, rolled in a horse blanket on a thick pile of hay. The lantern was turned down low. "Colt," she said. He was on his feet in an instant, the knife in his hand. He was not a man who slept deep. He saw her. He lowered the knife, but his body was tense, wary. "What's wrong?" he said. "He fined you." "No." She walked toward him. She was wearing only her thin cotton shift. The cold of the barn floor crept up her legs. "Go to bed. Sarah, I can't." She stopped in front of him. He was a mountain. He was shadow and silence and controlled violence. She was so tired of being controlled. She had to know. She had to know if he was just another version of Ezekiel, a man who used his strength to break things, or if he was something else. She pushed him. "What if I want it rough?" Her voice was a rasp. It was a taunt. It was a plea. It was the ugliest, most honest question she had ever asked. Colt froze. He stared at her. His eyes went from her face to her trembling hands, to her bare feet. He saw everything. He saw the desperation. He saw the anger. He saw the shame. He did not speak. He turned, his back to her, and walked to the barn door. She thought he was throwing her out. Instead, he dropped the heavy wooden bar into place. Thud. He locked the door. He turned back to her. The lantern light carved his face into a mask of shadow. "If I do this," he said, and his voice was a promise of winter, "it ain't gonna be like him. I'm not asking you to be gentle." "I know," he said. He didn't take her fast. He didn't tear at her clothes. He was not a drunken, fumbling boy. He took her deliberately. He walked to her. He put one hand on her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her bone. "Look at me," he commanded. She did. "This is you," he said, his voice low. "And this is me. Nothing else." He unbuttoned her shift, his calloused fingers surprisingly deft. He pushed it off her shoulders. It puddled at her feet. She stood before him, shaking in the cold, her bruises on display. He looked at them. His eyes darkened. A storm gathered. He did not touch them. He did not ask. He just saw. He lifted her. She weighed nothing to him. He carried her to the pile of hay and blankets. His mouth was rough. His beard scraped her skin. His hands were not gentle. They were firm. They were possessive. They gripped her hips and held her in place. Not with violence, but with an absolute, undeniable intent. It was raw. It was charged with all the shame she carried, all the rage she had swallowed. It was a release. He was heavy on top of her. A solid, grounding weight. She dug her nails into his back, wanting to leave marks, wanting to prove he was real. He was whispering to her, not words of love, but a litany of sensation. "Feel this, just this. You're here, with me." And then, in the middle of it, a ghost entered the barn. His hand moved on her hip, the pressure of his palm a familiar weight. And for one blinding second, he was not Colt. He was Ezekiel. "You will be corrected. Penance. You will be made pure." Lena flinched. A small, involuntary gasp. A tightening of her whole body. A turning away of her head. Colt stopped. Instantly. He did not just stop moving. He stopped breathing. He went utterly, terrifyingly still. His weight braced on his elbows. His body rigid above her. "No," she whispered, her eyes screwed shut. "Sarah! No, please!" she choked out. He pulled out of her. Not slow, not fast, just gone. He rolled off her, putting space between them. Lena's eyes snapped open. He was sitting 2 feet away, his back to her, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The sudden absence was worse than the pain had ever been. The cold rushed in. "Colt!" He didn't speak. She realized he hadn't stopped because he was angry. He had stopped because she'd flinched. He had stopped because he thought he had hurt her. He thought he was him. "Colt," she said, her voice stronger. She scrambled to her knees and grabbed his shoulder. He shrugged her off, his voice a raw wound. "Get your dress. Get out." "No." She grabbed him again, harder. "You, look at me." He turned, and his face broke her heart. His gray eyes were not cold. They were shattered. They were full of a self-loathing so deep it was an abyss. "I'm him," he whispered. "I'm just like him." "No," she said, and she slapped him. Not hard, just a sharp tap. "You are nothing like him." He stared at her, stunned. "He never stopped," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't you understand? He never stopped. Not when I cried, not when I begged, not when I bled. He liked it." She was crying now, the hard, ugly sobs she had held back for a year. "You," she said, jabbing a finger into his chest. "You stopped for me." She put her face in her hands. The tears wouldn't stop. It was a storm. It was a flood. It wasn't because it was too much. It was because, for the first time, it wasn't about pain. It was just want. And for the first time, her no had been heard. She broke down. She expected him to leave. She expected him to be disgusted. Instead, she felt his arms come around her. He pulled her into his lap, onto the hay, and just held her. He didn't pet her. He didn't shush her. He didn't offer her empty words. He just held her. His big, rough body, a solid wall against the cold. He tucked her head under his chin and wrapped the horse blanket around them both. He said nothing. He just breathed with her, his chest rising and falling in a steady, solid rhythm. He breathed with her until the sobs quieted. He breathed with her until her shaking stopped. He breathed with her until, exhausted and empty, and, for the first time in a year, safe, she fell asleep in his arms. Lena woke in the hayloft, cold and alone. The sun was a weak smear through the single, dirt-caked window. Colt was gone. For a moment, a sharp, cold panic seized her. The old panic, the familiar terror of waking up to find the world tilted back into nightmare. But the panic receded. He was not gone. He was just not there. She could feel the imprint of his body beside her in the hay, a faint warmth left behind. She was wrapped in his heavy horse blanket, the wool smelling of dust, horse, and him. He had left it for her. She dressed quickly, her hands fumbling. She felt sore, but it was not the sick, deep-bone soreness Ezekiel had left. This was a soreness of muscles used, of a body pushed but not broken. She felt alive. She slipped back into the saloon before the first gray light had fully given way to day. Silas was asleep on a cot behind the bar, snoring like a beached whale. None of the girls were awake. She was safe. The new wheel for the wagon arrived on a freight line 2 days later. It cost Colt a full month's pay. He spent an afternoon affixing it, his movements economical and precise. Lena watched him from the saloon window, her rag still in her hand as she polished the same glass over and over. He didn't look up, but she knew he felt her gaze. He should have left. The wagon was fixed. His supplies were loaded. The ranch was 20 miles north. He did not leave. He told Silas he needed to wait for a shipment of rock salt for the cattle, that the drought was making the grazing thin. It was a plausible lie. He took his meals at the back table. He drank his water. He slept in the barn. And they began to meet. It was not a courtship. It was a conspiracy. There were no flowers, no soft words. There was just the barn. After the saloon had closed, after the last drunk had been thrown into the street and Silas had bolted the door, she would wait. She would count to 100, her heart a heavy drum in her chest. Then she would slip out the back, a shadow moving through the biting cold. He would be waiting. The bar not on the door. He would be sitting in the dark, sharpening his knife, or mending a piece of tack, or just staring at the wall. He would look up when she entered, and the stillness in him would change. It would become charged. Their bond was built in silence. He would watch her, and she would watch him. Some nights, they did not speak at all. She would simply sit on a hay bale near him, wrapped in his blanket, and breathe the same dusty air. It was enough. Other nights, their hunger was too sharp. Their touches were small, intense, and stolen, his hand brushing hers in the dark as he passed her a tin cup of water. Her fingers, braver now, tracing the new bandage on his knuckles as he rewrapped it. He would take her hand, turn it over, and just hold it, studying her palm in the lantern light as if it held some map he needed to memorize. He would press his thumb into her pulse point, just feeling her life beat against his skin. One night, she dared to touch the thick, dark hair at his collar. He froze, his head bowed. She ran her fingers through it. It was softer than she expected. He let out a breath, a low, rough sound, and tilted his head back, giving her access. It was a small, profound gesture of trust. Their bond deepened in that charged silence, a secret language of shared space and quiet need. He was a man made of walls, and she was a woman who had been imprisoned by them. But his walls, she was learning, were not to keep her out. They were to keep the world from seeing the man inside. She found herself talking. It started small. She told him about the farm in Ohio, a place that felt like another lifetime, before her parents had died of fever. She told him about the wind, how she liked it because it was too loud to let a person think. He was a good listener. He never interrupted. He just watched her, his gray eyes steady, and nodded, prompting her to go on. One night, tucked into the hay, the wind screaming outside like a banshee, she told him. He was a preacher. Colt, who had been on the edge of sleep, went rigid. His arm, draped over her, tightened. A traveling minister, she continued, her voice a monotone, staring at the barn roof. He found me in Omaha. I was working in a laundry. He said I was lost. He said he saw a light in me that God wanted to claim. Colt's hand, which was resting on her hip, clenched into a fist. He said God had told him to take me as his wife, to save me from my sin. Were you married? Colt's voice was a low growl, barely audible over the wind. He had papers. They looked real. There was a justice of the peace. But it was all a lie. The justice was one of his men. The papers were fake. It wasn't a marriage. It was ownership. She told him about the traveling sermons, the incense, the kneeling crowds. She told him about the name he had given her, penance. She told him about the correction, the holy words he used to justify his fists. She told him about the way he would preach about the purity of women and then, in the dark, demand things that made her feel filthy. She told him everything, except the name. She could not speak the name. It felt like an invocation, a spell that would summon him. When she finished, the barn was silent, save for the wind. She was shaking. She had expected him to say something, to comfort her, to be disgusted. He said nothing. He simply pulled her closer, his fist still clenched, and held her. She could feel the rage coming off him in waves. It was a silent, murderous, terrifying rage. But it was not directed at her. It was for her. He held her for a long time. Finally, his voice rough, he asked, "His name?" "I can't," she whispered. He did not push. He did not pry. He just stroked her hair, his touch clumsy but real. "When you're ready," he said. The harshness of the land pressed in. The drought held. The sky remained a hard, unforgiving blue, mocking the dry earth. Dust storms became a weekly trial. Vast red clouds that rolled in from the plains, blotting out the sun, turning midday to a suffocating twilight. The dust was in everything. The water, the whiskey, the food. It ground between Lena's teeth. It caked her hair. It turned the saloon floor into a miniature desert. Colt was gone more often now. He rode out to the ranch, staying for 2 or 3 days at a time. He came back looking thinner, his face harder, the dust caked in his beard. "The calf?" she asked him one night. He had mentioned a sick calf, one his boss's wife had taken a liking to. "Died," he grunted, washing his face in a bucket. "No matter what I did, too weak. The mother's got no milk. This land, it's hungry." He was frustrated. It was something he couldn't fix with his gun, something he couldn't break with his hands. He hated being helpless. Lena understood that. He was in the saloon, eating a late meal at his back table. When the stranger came in, he was a merchant, one of the slick, snake oil types, selling tonics and powders. He sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey, and his eyes roamed. Lena was wiping down a table, her back to him. "Well, I'll be," the man said, his voice carrying in the quiet saloon. Lena didn't look up. "Penance, is that you, girl?" Lena froze. Her blood turned to ice. The rag fell from her hand. Silas stopped wiping the bar. Hattie, the blonde saloon girl, looked up. Lena turned. Slowly, the merchant's eyes widened, a greasy smile spreading across his face. "It is you. I'd know you anywhere. I saw you give testimony in Cheyenne. You were with Preacher Grant. You're his wife." The words hit the room like bullets. His wife. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She couldn't breathe. The room was tilting. "He said you'd been taken by sickness," the merchant continued, oblivious. "Or maybe it was that you'd gone astray. He was mighty broken up about it. Been looking for you. A man needs his wife. After all." The merchant stood up, walking toward her. "What in the world are you doing in a place like this, ma'am?" Lena was trapped. Her feet were rooted to the floor. "He's looking for me." "He's looking—" A shadow fell over the merchant. Colt. He had moved without a sound. He was just there. He stood between Lena and the merchant. He hadn't touched his gun. He was just standing, his hands at his sides, his shoulders blocking the light. The merchant, who was not a small man, suddenly looked tiny. "You're mistaken." Colt's voice was not loud. It was a flat, cold statement of fact. The merchant blinked, the smile faltering. "Now, see here, I know what I saw. This is Preacher Grant's wife. Penance. Her name is Sarah," Colt said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "And you are mistaken." There was no threat in his voice. It was worse than a threat. It was a finality. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. The merchant looked from Colt's dead gray eyes to Lena's white face. He was a weasel, but not a stupid one. He understood the language of violence, even when it was spoken softly. Well, maybe I had it wrong." The merchant stammered. "It's the light in here. She just looks like her. My mistake. My apologies. Ma'am." He fumbled in his pocket, threw some coins on the bar, and grabbed his hat. "My apologies," he said again. To Colt, he practically ran out of the saloon. The room was silent. Hattie was staring, her mouth open. Silas was polishing the same spot on the bar, his face unreadable. Colt stood there for a second, his back to Lena. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his table. He sat down and picked up his fork. That night in the barn, she was a wreck. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "He's looking for me. He's looking for me. Oh, God, Colt, he's going to find me." "He ain't," Colt said. "You don't know that. That man, he'll talk. He'll tell someone. The name is out. Grant, Penance. They'll connect it. He'll find me. He'll come here. Let him." She stared at him. "Let him? He'll kill me. Or worse, he'll take me back. He's got papers. Colt!" "I don't care about his papers." "You don't understand," she shrieked, hysteria rising in her throat. "No," he said, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was hard, grounding her. "You don't understand." He let her go and walked to a pile of saddles. He dug into a saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped object. He walked back to her and held it out. It was a revolver. Not her heavy, stolen one. This was smaller, with a pearl handle, a Colt .32, light and balanced. She stared at it. "You won't be afraid," he said. "You'll be ready." I don't know how," she whispered. "I'll teach you." He took her out the next day, at dawn. He rode her north on his roan, out of town, into the chalky, wind-scoured cliffs. He took her to a place where no one could hear, a small box canyon that trapped the sound. He was a different man. He was not her silent, watchful lover. He was a teacher, patient, demanding, and cold. "This is not a toy," he said, pressing the gun into her hand. "It has one purpose. Don't you ever pull it unless you mean to use it. And if you use it until the threat is gone. You understand?" "Yes. Show me." He taught her to stand, how to hold her arm, how to breathe, how to aim. Not at the whole man, but at the single, small button on his shirt. "It's heavy," she complained, her arms shaking. "It's supposed to be. It's the weight of a life. Get used to it. Now, breathe out. And squeeze. Don't pull." The first shot was deafening. It slammed her shoulder back and she screamed. Dropping the gun, Colt picked it up. He checked it. He handed it back to her. "Again!" She fired until her arm ached, until her shoulder was bruised, until her ears rang and the smell of sulfur and gun oil was in her hair, on her skin. She was a terrible shot. She missed the tin can he had set up every single time. "I can't," she said, frustrated, tears in her eyes. "You can—" His voice was relentless. "The man who's hunting you, he won't care if you're tired. He won't care if your arm aches. He will only care that you are weak. Are you weak?" "No," she hissed. "Then prove it. Again." She raised the gun. She thought of Ezekiel's face, his silver-tongued promises, his righteous, violent hands. She breathed out. She squeezed. The can jumped. A clean shot, right through the middle. She lowered the gun, her hand trembling, a fierce, hot wave of power surging through her. Colt nodded once, a rare flicker of something, pride. "Good," he said. Again. That night, a storm broke. Not dust, rain. A real pounding prairie thunderstorm that cracked the sky open. The drought broke in a deluge, and the sound on the barn roof was a deafening drum roll. The world was gone. There was only the barn, the lantern light, and the roar of the rain. They were in the hayloft, soaked from running from the saloon. Lena was high on the gunfire, on the power, on the storm. She was tired of being afraid. She turned to him, her wet clothes clinging to her. "He'll find me," she said. "I won't let him take you." "I know." She kissed him, a hard, desperate kiss. She pushed him back into the hay. "This time," she whispered, her voice raw against his mouth, her hands tearing at his shirt. "Harder this time. I want to forget everything." He froze for a second, looking into her eyes. He saw the fire. He saw the need. He obliged. But it was never without care. His mouth was rough. His hands were hard. He gripped her hips and set a driving, pounding rhythm that matched the rain on the roof. He took what she offered and gave back in kind. He was not gentle. He was a force, an answer to the storm inside her. But he watched her. His eyes never left her face. When she gasped, he slowed. When she dug her nails into his shoulders, he drove deeper. He never crossed the line. He took her right to the edge of pain, of release, of forgetting. But he never let her fall into the dark. It was a controlled, violent, beautiful storm. After, she lay spent in his arms, the rain a dull roar on the roof, her body humming. She broke, again. But it was not the jagged, sobbing breakdown of before. It was a quiet, deep, cleansing grief. She cried for the girl she had been, for the woman she had been forced to become. He held her, stroking her damp hair. And this time, he shared his shame. He told her about his mother, about the marshal, about being 15 and holding a gun so heavy he needed 2 hands. "I didn't feel nothing," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick. "Not sadness. Not fear, just quiet. I shot him, and it all just stopped. The beatings, the crying, everything. It was quiet, and I've been chasing that quiet ever since." He showed her a scar on his side, a puckered, ugly thing. "This was in Kansas, a card game. I wasn't fast enough." "We're both marked," she whispered, touching the scar. Maybe we don't fix each other, she said, her voice small, her breath fogging in the cooling air. Maybe we just stop pretending we're broken. He held her tighter, his rough beard scratching her temple. He was quiet for so long. She thought he had fallen asleep. Then he spoke, his voice low and sure, the truest thing she had ever heard. You're not broken, Lena. You were just used wrong. He had used her real name. The brief, fragile safety of the storm-washed world shattered 4 days later. The rain had stopped, the mud had hardened back into dust, and the sky had returned to its vacant, sun-bleached white. Lena was hanging laundry behind the saloon, a job Silas had added to her duties, when the wagon rolled into town. It was not a supply wagon. It was a black, enclosed carriage, the kind circuit judges or wealthy merchants used. It was clean, which was an obscenity. In Chalk Ridge, 2 men rode flanking it on horseback, their dusters worn long, their hats pulled low. They wore badges, hired marshals, not local law. The carriage stopped in front of the sheriff's office. The driver, a thick, brutish man, got down. He opened the door. Lena's heart stopped. Ezekiel Grant stepped out. He was exactly as she remembered. He was not a big man, but he radiated an authority that made him seem to fill the street. He wore a clean black suit, a string tie, and a spotless, wide-brimmed hat. His face was handsome, his beard neatly trimmed, his eyes a piercing, righteous blue. He looked like a prophet. He looked like salvation. Lena knew he was the devil. She dropped the wet sheet in the dirt. She turned and ran, not to her room, but to the saloon, bursting through the back door. Colt was not there. He was at the ranch. He was not there. "Sarah, what in the—" Silas started, looking up from his accounts. "He's here," she gasped, backing against the bar, her eyes wide with a terror that was absolute. "Who's here?" But the bat-wing doors of the saloon swung open, and the question was answered. Ezekiel Grant stepped inside. He removed his hat, revealing his clean, pale forehead. His blue eyes scanned the room, a look of profound, gentle sorrow on his face. They passed over Silas, over Hattie and Pearl, who were just coming down the stairs, and then they found Lena. His face lit up with a smile of such love, such radiant joy, that it made Lena physically sick. "Penance," he said. His voice was not a shout. It was a beautiful, resonant baritone, a voice made for sermons and sweet-talking. It filled the saloon. "My child, you are found." Lena was not Lena. She was not Sarah. She was Penance. She was trapped. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. The 2 hired marshals filled the doorway behind him. "My dear," Grant said, walking toward her, his arms open. "I have been sick with worry. I have prayed, and the Lord, in His infinite mercy, has led me to you." Lena said nothing. She was pressed so hard against the bar she could feel the wood digging into her spine. "Who the hell are you?" Silas grunted, reaching under the bar for his scattergun. Grant's smile did not falter. He turned his gentle, sorrowful gaze on Silas. "I am Ezekiel Grant, sir, a humble servant of the Lord, and this is my wife." "She ain't your wife," a low voice said from the back corner. Lena's head snapped. Colt. He was there. He must have come in the back way. He was sitting at his table, his hat on, his hands flat on the wood. He had not been at the ranch. He had been here. He had been watching. Grant's smile tightened. Just a fraction. He looked at Colt, a quick, dismissive glance at the rough, dusty cowboy. "My poor child," Grant said, turning back to Lena, his voice dripping with pity. "What has this place done to you? What has this man filled your head with? You are confused. You are unwell. But I am here. I am your husband. I have come to take you home." "She ain't going nowhere," Colt said, his voice flat. He still had not moved. One of the hired marshals, a man with a scarred lip, stepped forward. "This is a legal matter. Friend, best you stay out of it. The preacher has papers." "I don't care about his papers," Colt said. "But the law does," said a new voice. Sheriff Brody stood in the doorway. He was a man in his 50s, with a weary face and a drooping mustache. He hated Chalk Ridge. and he hated his job. He looked at Grant, then at Colt, then at Lena. He sighed. "Preacher," Brody said. "You claim this woman is your wife?" "She is, Sheriff," Grant said, his voice a balm. "My beloved Lena, who I took to my bosom in the eyes of God and the state of Nebraska. Here." He produced a folded, official-looking document from his coat pocket. "Our marriage certificate. And here," he produced another, "a warrant for her return, signed by a judge in Cheyenne. She fled my protection. I feared she had been captured, or fallen into sin. I see now. My worst fears were realized." He gestured to the saloon, to the whiskey bottles, to the saloon girls on the stairs. Sheriff Brody took the papers. He unfolded them. He read them. He looked at Lena. "Ma'am, is this true? Are you Lena Grant?" Lena's throat was closed. She couldn't speak. If she spoke, she would scream. If she spoke, the lie would become real. Colt stood up. The movement was sudden and silent. The entire room tensed. The scarred marshal's hand moved to his gun. "Sit down, Maddox," the sheriff warned. His voice tired. "This ain't your business." "He's lying," Colt said. "The law says he is not," Brody said, waving the paper. "I got a signed warrant from a circuit judge. That's more law than I've seen in this town in 6 months. Now, I don't like this any more than you do, but I am bound to uphold it." "He's a liar," Colt said again. He was looking at Grant. His gray eyes were not cold. They were molten. "Maddox," I said, "sit down, or I will arrest you for obstruction." Colt did not sit, but he did not move forward. He just watched. He watched as Sheriff Brody walked over to Lena. "Ma'am, I gotta ask you to come with me." Lena looked at Colt. Her eyes were wide, screaming, "Do something! Stop this! You promised! You promised!" Colt just stood there, silent, deadly. And he did nothing. A single tear of pure, hot betrayal rolled down Lena's cheek. "No," she whispered. The scarred marshal was not gentle. He grabbed her arm, the same arm the drover had grabbed. This time, Colt did not move. "Let's go, ma'am." Lena did not fight. She went numb. The fire that had been building in her for weeks, the fire Colt had stoked, was extinguished, doused in the ice of his betrayal. She let them lead her out. She did not look at him as she passed. She was arrested at the Dead Coyote Saloon, and the man who had her in his arms just the night before watched and let it happen. The cell was a 6-by-8-foot cage of iron bars and filth. It smelled of urine and despair. She sat on the thin, lice-ridden cot and stared at the stone wall. She refused to speak. She refused to eat. She refused to move. She was penance again. She was an object. She was a thing to be owned, and she had been fool enough to believe she could be anything else. She sat for hours. The sun moved across the floor. Evening fell. She heard footsteps. It was not the sheriff. It was him. Ezekiel Grant stood on the other side of the bars. He did not look like a savior now. In the dim lantern light of the jailhouse, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. The blue eyes were cold. "You have sinned," he said. His voice was not the beautiful, resonant baritone. It was a low, cold whisper, the voice she heard in her nightmares. Lena said nothing. She continued to stare at the wall. "You have sinned against God, and you have sinned against me, your husband. You laid with filth. You disgraced my name in that place." He gripped the bars. His knuckles were white. "You are a whore, Lena. You are a vessel of weakness and sin, and you have made me look like a fool." He was quiet for a long time. She could feel the heat of his rage coming through the bars. Then the mask returned. He sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound. He pressed his handsome face to the bars, his expression one of profound, heartbroken forgiveness. "But I am your husband," he whispered, the silver returning to his tongue. "And I will forgive you. As God forgives, I will cleanse you. I will beat this sin from you, and I will make you pure again. We will leave this terrible place. You will come home, and we will pray, And this nightmare will be forgotten. He unlocked the cell door. The sheriff was not there. He had left Grant alone with his wife. He stepped inside. He reached out his hand, the one that held the Bible during sermons, and stroked her hair. Just come with me, my dear. Be obedient, and all will be forgiven. Lena turned her head. She looked at him. She saw the lie in his eyes. She saw the cold, possessive thing that lived behind his handsome face. She gathered all the saliva in her mouth, all the dust and grit from the jail, and she spat in his face. It landed on his cheek. The forgiveness vanished. His eyes went black. His hand, the one that had been stroking her hair, snapped back. He did not slap her. He hit her. A hard, backhand crack across the mouth that sent her sprawling from the cot onto the filthy floor. Her lips split. She tasted her own blood. He stood over her, his chest heaving, his face a mask of pure, unholy rage. He wiped her spittle from his cheek with a clean white handkerchief. "You will learn," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You will learn that I am your master. God has willed it. You will beg me for forgiveness before I am through." He turned, stepped out of the cell, and bolted the door. "Sheriff," he called, his voice booming and righteous again. "My wife is unwell. She needs a night to reflect on her sins." Lena stayed on the floor, her blood dripping onto the stone. She did not cry. She just hated. She hated Grant. She hated the sheriff. And most of all, she hated Colt Maddox. Colt had left the saloon right after them. He had not followed them to the jail. He had walked into the sheriff's office. Brody was behind his desk. The papers spread out. A bottle of cheap whiskey next to them. "Don't say it, Maddox," Brody said, pouring a glass. "Those papers are forged." Colt said, "They look real to me. Signed by Judge Allister. I know Allister. He's a hard man, but he's fair. The men he's with, they ain't marshals. They got badges. Colt, what do you want me to do? I'm one man. He's got 2 guns and a judge's signature. I got a town full of cowards and a rusty jail cell." "You saw her face," Colt said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I saw a lot of things," Brody said. "Drinking. I saw a woman who looked scared. I see that every day. I also saw you, ready to kill 3 men in the middle of my street. That would have helped her real good. A dead cowboy and a hunted woman." "He beats her," Colt said. Brody stopped, his glass halfway to his mouth. "You know that?" "I know it. That complicates things," he sighed, rubbing his face. "But it don't change this." He tapped the warrant. "This is a property dispute, plain and simple. She's his wife, his property. What he does with his own is, well, it ain't my business. It ain't right, but it ain't my business." "Ezekiel Grant," Colt said. "He travels. He preaches. He takes women. He calls them his wives. He moves them from state to state. He sells the ones who get too old or too broken. He's not a preacher. He's a slaver." Brody stared at him. "You know this?" "I know a man in Kansas, a real marshal. He's been tracking a fella just like that. A fella who uses God to steal women. A fella named Grant." "Then why didn't you say something?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You'd have believed the paper." Brody was silent. He looked at the paper. He looked at Colt. "So what's your play? Maddox, you gonna shoot your way through?" "Not yet," Colt said. "You're gonna hold him. You're gonna tell him the judge's signature looks off, that you need to telegraph Cheyenne to confirm the warrant. He'll know I'm lying. His guns'll know. You tell him it's procedure. You give me 1 day. That's all I need. 1 day. And what do you do in that day? Go after the girl?" "No," Colt said. "I'm gonna go to the ranch. I'm gonna get my pay. And I'm gonna get the 3 men I work with." Brody looked at him. 4 guns against 2. 4 guns against 2, Colt agreed. "And we ain't gonna be in the street. We're gonna be at the ranch. He wants her. He can come and get her. Off your property. Out of your town. It becomes a private matter." Brody understood. A fight at the ranch was a dispute between ranchers. A fight in his street was a massacre. He looked at Colt. He looked at the whiskey. He sighed. "One day. Maddox, that's all." He raises his voice. "I gotta let him go, but I'll give you 1 day." Colt nodded. "Check on the girl." "I will." "He'll want to see her. He'll want to pray with her. Don't let him—" "I'll do my best," Brody said. But he was a weak man, and he was afraid of Grant. He had let him in. That night, around midnight, Colt went to the jail. The back window was barred, but the frame was rotten. He had checked it earlier. He didn't have a key. He had a crowbar. He made almost no sound. The wood gave way with a soft crackle. He pulled the bars out, frame and all. He slipped into the cell. She was on the floor, a dark lump. For one terrible second, he thought. "Lena." She stirred. She scrambled back, crab-walking into the corner, her eyes wide and feral in the moonlight. "Get away from me," she hissed. He saw her face, the split lip, the blood. A black, cold rage filled him, the kind of rage he'd felt when he was 15, the quiet kind. "I'm getting you out." "Go to hell," she spat. "You left me. You let him—" "I'm getting you out," he said again. He grabbed her. She fought him, kicking and scratching. A silent, furious battle. She was strong, but he was stronger. He pinned her arms. "He hit you." It was a statement. "You let him." "I'm done letting him," Colt said. He threw her, bodily, through the broken window. She landed on her feet in the dirt outside. He followed in a single, fluid motion. His horse was in the alley. He threw her on it, mounted behind her, and clamped a hand over her mouth. "You scream," he whispered in her ear, "and you get us both killed. We're going to the ranch. Now. You be quiet, or I will make you quiet." She bit his hand. He didn't flinch. He just spurred the horse. They rode out of town, a shadow in the dark, leaving Brody's 1 day and the law far behind. They rode hard for 2 hours, the horse's breath pluming in the cold, the moon a sliver. He didn't speak. She didn't speak. She was a rigid, furious weight in front of him. The ranch was a small, fortified house in a barn, nestled in a box canyon. It was defensible. He dismounted, pulling her down with him. He half-dragged her into the main house. It was empty. The other hands were in the bunkhouse. He barred the door. He turned. She hit him. She hit him with all the force in her body, an open-palmed slap that cracked in the quiet room. He didn't move, just took it. His head barely turned. "You let him take me!" She screamed, her voice breaking. "You stood there! You watched! You promised I wouldn't be weak! And you made me weak! You abandoned me!" She hit him again and again, beating on his chest with her fists. He let her, for a full minute, until her rage was spent and she was just sobbing, her fists on his shirt. Then he grabbed her wrists. He grabbed them hard. "And what was I supposed to do, Lena?" he said, his voice a low, hard growl. "What? Shoot 2 marshals and a preacher in front of the sheriff? Get us both killed? Get a posse on our tail before we even cleared town? You didn't do anything. I was doing something. I was buying us time. I was talking to Brody. I was getting you a day." "A day?" He put his hands on me. "Colt! And I'm gonna kill him for it," he roared. The sudden volume shocked them both. He never yelled. "I'm gonna put him in the ground. But I'm gonna do it right. I'm gonna do it in a way that don't make you an outlaw's woman for the rest of your life." "I was handling it." "This," she said, touching her split lip, "is you handling it?" He looked at her lip. His face crumpled. The rage left, replaced by that dark, familiar self-loathing. "He did that. Yes. I should have killed him in the saloon." "Yes," she whispered. "I'm sorry. Lena, I was trying to be smart. I was trying to fix it with the law. But there ain't no law for him. There's just us." He pulled her to him. It was not a gentle embrace. It was a collision. He crushed her against him, his face buried in her hair. "He ain't taking you," he whispered. "He ain't. I'll kill him. I'll kill the marshals. I'll kill Brody. I'll burn that damn town to the ground." She clung to him, her anger gone, replaced by a cold, desperate fear. "He's coming. Colt. He won't stop." I know. He kissed her. It was not the careful, deliberate exploration of the first time. It was not the storm-fueled passion of the second. It was rough. It was desperate. It was survival. His mouth was hard on her split lip, and she tasted her own blood. Their shared, metallic fear. His hands were in her hair, gripping, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in the world. He tore at her dress, the one she'd been wearing for a day in a cell, and she tore at his shirt. It was not about love. It was about release. It was about proving they were alive. It was about the fight to come. He pushed her back against the rough-hewn table, his body a solid, driving weight against hers. It was not gentle. He was marking her, claiming her, branding her in a way that told Grant, that told the world, that she was his. And she met him, force for force, her nails raking his back, her teeth on his shoulder. It was a fight. It was a promise. It was the only language they had. She woke the next morning in his bed, the sun streaming through the window. She was naked, tangled in the sheets. She was sore everywhere. She sat up, and she saw them. There were bruises on her hips, on her shoulders, on her collarbone. Dark, angry, beautiful marks. They were not Ezekiel's bruises. Ezekiel's marks were small, precise, hidden. They were meant to punish and shame. They were the color of cold, righteous anger. These were the color of fire. They were the marks of a desperate passion, of a man claiming her, of a woman fighting back. They were the map of their survival. She touched a dark mark on her hip, where his thumb had dug in. She felt no shame. She felt possession. She looked at her split lip in the small mirror, and for the first time since Ohio, Lena smiled. It was not a pretty smile. It was a raw, bloody, terrifying smile. The door opened. Colt stood there, a cup of coffee in one hand, his rifle in the other. He had been up all night. He looked at her, at the bruises, at her smile. His face was grim. He walked to the window, looked out at the canyon rim, his eyes scanning for movement. He set the coffee on the table. "He's not taking you back," Colt said, his voice flat, checking the action on his rifle. "I'll burn this damn town first." Lena's smile widened. She took the coffee. It was hot, and it was black. "I know," she said. The sun was high and brutal. It was just past noon. Colt had been watching the canyon rim for 6 hours, his rifle resting on the windowsill. The other 3 hands, old-timers named Pete, Abe, and Silas, who were loyal to Colt's pay more than any boss, were positioned in the barn and behind the water trough. They were not here for a discussion. "2 riders," Abe called from the barn, his voice quiet in the heavy, hot air. Colt saw them. They were not trying to be quiet. They were riding in as if they owned the place. The scarred marshal and the other one, they were coming down the main path, sunlight glinting off their badges. "That's far enough," Colt yelled. His voice was flat, carrying in the stillness. The riders stopped, about 200 yards out. "We're here on behalf of Preacher Grant." The scarred one, Barker, yelled. "We got a warrant for the woman. Send her out, Maddox, and we'll let you live." "Not a chance," Abe called back. "This is your last warning," Barker shouted. "This is my warning," Colt said, his voice just as loud, just as flat. "You're not marshals. Your papers are fake, and you're on private land. Turn around." Barker looked at his partner. He laughed. "You and what army? Killer." He spurred his horse, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. His partner did the same. They charged. It was a foolish move. Colt did not aim for the man. He aimed for the horse. His first shot was a clean, sharp crack that echoed off the canyon walls. Barker's horse screamed and went down. A clean shot to the chest. Barker was thrown, landing hard, his rifle skittering across the dust. The second rider, seeing his partner fall, panicked. He tried to turn his horse, to get back into the cover of the rocks. A shot came from the barn. Abe, the rider, jolted, grabbed his shoulder, and fell from his horse. He screamed. Colt shifted his aim. Barker was on the ground, his leg pinned, trying to reach his rifle. He was exposed, helpless. Colt sighted him. The button on his shirt. "Don't, Colt," Lena said from behind him. Colt's finger was on the trigger. Barker looked up, his face a mask of fear. He saw Colt in the window. Colt exhaled. He shifted his aim 6 inches to the left and squeezed the trigger. The bullet kicked up dust right next to Barker's head, stinging his face. Barker froze. The other rider was moaning, holding his shoulder, trying to crawl. "Abe, Pete!" Colt yelled. "Hold your fire!" He stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held low, pointed at the men. "Take your friend," Colt said, his voice calm. "And go!" Barker scrambled, got his leg free from the dead horse, and stumbled over to his partner. The man was bleeding badly from the shoulder. Barker, his face white, looked at Colt. "He needs a doctor." "Then you best get him to one," Colt said. "Tell Grant. He wants her. He comes himself. He sends anyone else. I won't shoot the horse." Barker, his face a mask of terror and hate, understood. He helped his wounded partner onto the remaining horse, the man groaning and half fainting. Barker mounted behind him, glaring at Colt. "This ain't over. Maddox." "It is for you," Colt said. He watched them ride away. One man wounded, the other disgraced, until they were just a speck of dust. He let them crawl back. He wanted them to deliver the message. The message was delivered. The wounded marshal was proof. Ezekiel Grant did not react with fear. He reacted with brilliance. He did not storm the ranch. He did not call for more guns. He went to the law, but he didn't go to Sheriff Brody. He went to the people. He stood on a wagon in the middle of the street, his Bible in his hand, his beautiful, resonant voice, filled with pain and righteous fury, echoed between the squat, ugly buildings. "Men and women of Chalk Ridge," he cried, "I came to you in peace. I came seeking my wife, my beloved, who was stolen from me, led astray by the serpent of sin." A small crowd had gathered. The curious, the bored, the pious. "I brought the law. I brought papers. I acted as a man of God, as a man of peace, and what was my reward?" He pointed to the doctor's office, where the wounded man was being tended. "Violence. The man I hired to protect me, a sworn officer, has been shot. My property has been defied. My wife, is being held captive by a known killer." He was good. He was better than good. He was magnificent. The killer, Colt Maddox, a man who hides in the rocks, a man who solves his problems with a bullet. He has taken my Lena. He has filled her head with poison. He has defiled her. The crowd murmured. They knew Maddox. They knew his reputation. This was a story they could understand. "The law in this town is weak," Grant roared, turning on Brody's office. "The sheriff is afraid. But are we afraid? Shall we let a killer and a harlot defy the laws of God and man in our very homes?" "What do you want us to do, preacher?" someone yelled. "I want justice. I want my wife. And I want that man, Colt Maddox, brought to justice for his crimes." He had them. He was turning the town into his own personal posse. Sheriff Brody was trapped. He now had an armed standoff at the ranch, a wounded man in his town, and a preacher one step from starting a lynch mob. He was a weak man, but he was not a stupid one. He knew this had to end, and it had to end now. He saddled his horse and rode to the ranch. He carried a white flag. "Maddox," he yelled from a safe distance. "I need to talk." Colt met him on the porch. "You've made a mess." "Colt," Brody said, dismounting. "I finished what you wouldn't. You started a war. Grant's got the whole town riled. They're talking about sin and womanly disobedience, and how you're a killer holding a white woman hostage." "She ain't his hostage. She's his prisoner." "It don't matter what I think," Brody sighed. "It matters what they do. And right now, they're about to grab their pitchforks and their rifles. I can't stop 'em. Colt, not with just me." "So what's your play?" Colt asked. "A town trial. Right now. Today. We all go back. You, the girl, the preacher. We put it all out. In the saloon. Everyone hears. And we let the town decide." "That's your answer?" A trial by mob. Colt's voice was full of contempt. It's better than a war, Brody yelled. It's the only chance she's got. You let me bring you in. Peaceful. You bring the girl. We talk. If we don't, then Grant's gonna come up here with 20 men, and you ain't gonna win that. Colt looked at Lena, who was standing in the doorway. She had heard everything. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard. He's right, she said. Colt looked at her. Lena, he's right. He's beat me in the dark. He's beat me with the law. Now he's trying to beat me with the town. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of you fighting for me. Let me fight. Let me talk. Let me tell them. Colt looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the split lip she wore like a badge. He turned back to Brody. We go, we talk, but I keep my gun. She keeps hers, and my men will be in that room. That's the deal. Brody looked like he was going to be sick, but he nodded. Deal. God help us all. The Dead Coyote Saloon had never been so full, or so quiet. It was not a trial. It was a reckoning. The whole town was there. Every shopkeep, every ranch hand in for supplies, every dusty freighter. The saloon girls, Hattie, Pearl, and May, stood in the back. The merchant who had recognized Lena was there, hiding near the door. Grant and his remaining marshal were on one side. Lena, Colt, and his 3 men were on the other. Sheriff Brody stood on the bar, looking terrified. All right, Brody said, his voice shaky. We're here to settle this. Preacher Grant, you got the floor. Grant stood. He was magnificent. He was the picture of a wronged, holy man. He spoke of law. He spoke of his marriage certificate, which he held up for all to see. He spoke of his Christian duty to his wife, to guide her back from sin. This poor, lost child, he said, his voice breaking with false emotion, was stolen by a man of violence. She is confused. She is sick. She is not responsible for her actions. I am responsible for her. I am her husband. And I am here to take her home, to heal her, to pray with her, and to forgive her. He sat down. The room murmured. It was a good speech. It was convincing. Ma'am, Brody said, turning to Lena. Miss Sarah. Ma'am, you got anything to say? Lena stood up. The room went dead silent. She was not magnificent. She was pale. She was thin. She was wearing a borrowed man's shirt. Her lip was split and swollen. She looked broken. She looked at the faces. The cold, curious, judgmental faces. She looked at Grant. He was smiling at her. A small, sad, forgiving smile. She looked at Colt. He was at the back table, his chair tilted against the wall, his hat low. He was just watching. He gave her a single, short nod. You can... She turned back to the crowd. My name is not Penance, she said, her voice small, but it carried in the silence. My name is Lena, and I am not his wife. Grant sighed, a theatrical sound. My dear, the papers. His papers are a lie, she said, her voice rising. He paid a man in a back room in Omaha to sign it. He told me it was the law. She is unwell, Grant said to the crowd, his voice full of pity. I am not unwell, Lena said. I am angry, and I am afraid, but I am not unwell. She walked into the center of the room. You want to know what this holy man is? This husband? She unbuttoned the top buttons of her shirt, pulling the collar aside. The bruises on her collarbone, the ones from Colt, were dark and stark. This, she said, is what a man who loves you does. It is rough, it is a mark, but it is honest. The crowd gasped. Hattie's hand went to her mouth. Grant's eyes widened. And this, Lena said, turning, her voice breaking. She pointed to a faint, yellowing shadow on her arm. An older mark, one that was almost faded. This is what he does. The crowd couldn't see it. It was too faint. You can't see it? Lena said, her voice rising with a desperate, hysterical edge. You can't? He was so careful. He never marked my face. Only where the clothes would hide it. She was losing them. They saw the new bruises, not the old ones. He He has papers, a man in the back said. A man's got to be able to correct his wife. It's in the Bible. Silence! The voice was not Colt's. It was Hattie, the saloon girl. She stepped forward. Her face, usually painted, was pale with rage. "I've seen correction," Hattie said, her voice low and shaking. "I've seen a slap after too much whiskey. That ain't correction. I've seen that preacher. I've seen his eyes. He enjoys it. And any man who enjoys it ain't a husband. He's just a bully. She's a whore," someone muttered. "And you're a coward," Hattie spat back. "Miss Hattie is impassioned," Grant said, standing, his voice smooth as oil. "But this is a matter of law, not saloon girl opinion. The law also says you can't beat a person near to death," said a quiet, reedy voice. It was Miss Althea, the schoolteacher, a woman who had never spoken above a whisper in her life. She was clutching a book to her chest. The law is meant to protect, not to own. I have seen Lena, I mean Sarah, in town. She is quiet, and she is kind, and she is terrified. That man," she pointed a trembling finger at Grant. "He is not kind. He is a wolf, and he is in this sheepfold." The room was stunned. The schoolteacher and the prostitute, standing together. "This is madness," Grant said. "This is a conspiracy of harlots and spinsters against a man of God. Sheriff, I demand you honor my warrant." "I think," Sheriff Brody said, his voice surprisingly firm. He had seen the shift. "We ain't done listening. There's nothing more to say," Grant said. "I got something to say." Colt's chair scraped the floor as it came down. He stood up. He did not move to the center. He just stood by his table. He took off his hat. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Lena. Then he looked at Ezekiel Grant. "He lays one hand on her again," Colt said, his voice flat, clear, and final. "And I'll put him in the ground." It was not a threat. It was a promise. It was a fact. It was the sky is blue, the rock is hard, and I will kill you. The tension in the room was a living thing. It was a coiled snake. Grant's face, for the first time, was no longer handsome. It was a livid, mottled red. The mask was gone. The preacher was gone. There was only the bully. He had lost. He had lost the law. He had lost the town. He had lost her. "You whore!" he screamed. His voice no longer a resonant baritone, but a high, ugly shriek. He lung-roared, lunging not at Colt, but at the source of his humiliation. At her. He lunged at Lena, his hand raised, claw-like, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. Lena flinched. The gunshot was deafening. It was not a second. It was not half a second. It was the space between thought and action. Colt's gun was in his hand, smoking. Ezekiel Grant was on the floor, on his back, screaming. He was not screaming about God. He was not screaming about the law. He was just screaming. Colt had not aimed for the chest. He had not aimed for the head. He had shot him clean through the leg. The room was frozen in a cloud of blue smoke and the smell of sulfur. Grant was on the floor, clutching his thigh, his own blood, dark and real, pooling on the dirty floorboards, staining his clean black suit. Colt stood, his gun still raised, his eyes cold and empty. The remaining hired marshal, the one who hadn't been to the ranch, looked at Grant on the floor. He looked at Colt. He looked at the smoking gun. He put his hands up, very slowly. I'm just a hired man. I was told it was legal. I quit." He backed out of the saloon. Sheriff Brody let out a breath. He looked at Grant, writhing on the floor. He looked at Colt, who hadn't moved. "Well," Brody said, to the room, "I'd say this. This partnership is dissolved." He looked at Colt. "You put that away. You ain't in charge here." Colt slowly, deliberately, lowered the hammer and holstered his gun. Brody looked at the townsfolk. "This is done. The show's over. Go home." He looked at Abe and Pete. "You two load this trash into his own wagon and take his gun and tell him If I ever see his face in this territory again, I won't let Maddox shoot him in the leg." The town let the sheriff drop the case quietly. The law had been served. Abe and Pete, grinning, hauled the screaming, cursing preacher out of the saloon and dumped him in his black carriage. He was forced to leave, a bleeding, disgraced, and powerless man. That night, they were not at the ranch. Colt had traded his work for his men's help. They were in the barn. They were leaving in the morning. Lena sat on the hay bale, watching the moon through the slats in the wood. She should have been happy. She should have been relieved. She should have been free. She was not. She just felt empty. The anger that had fueled her for weeks was gone. The fear was gone, and there was nothing left. She began to cry. Not the hard, racking sobs of before, just a quiet, heavy, endless weeping. Colt, who had been cleaning his rifle, stopped. He sat on the bale opposite her, not touching her. He just sat, and he let her cry. "I thought I'd feel free," she whispered, her voice thick, when the tears had finally stopped. I thought I'd feel light. I feel heavy. I feel nothing." Colt was quiet for a long time, the sound of the crickets filling the silence. He reached out, not to comfort, but just to connect. He laid his rough, calloused hand on hers. "Freedom ain't light, Lena," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's heavy. It's the heaviest thing you'll ever carry. All that fear, that was a weight, but it was a weight you knew. This is a new one." He squeezed her hand. "But it's yours now. You own it, and you don't gotta carry it alone." They left Chalk Ridge at dawn. There was no fanfare, no one to see them go. Hattie had pressed a small bag of peppermint sticks into Lena's hand, her eyes watery, and Silas had given Colt a full bottle of whiskey, a gesture that was, for him, a proclamation of undying love. "Don't come back, Maddox," Silas had grunted. "I don't plan to," Colt replied. Sheriff Brody had been conspicuously absent. They rode south, toward Colorado territory. Colt had his roan, and he had acquired a steady, unbothered mule for Lena. She was not a strong rider, but she was a stubborn one, and she refused to complain. Their supplies were meager. One pack horse carrying flour, salt pork, coffee, ammunition, and an axe. Colt's rifle was in his scabbard, and Lena's pearl-handled revolver was tucked into her own belt, the weight of it a strange and constant comfort. The silence between them was as vast as the land they rode through. It was not the charged, wary silence of the barn, nor the cold, furious silence of the ride to the ranch. It was something new. It was the heavy freedom Colt had spoken of. They were two people, untethered, with nothing behind them but smoke and blood, and nothing ahead but a wide, brown, empty sky. For the first 3 days, they barely spoke. They rode from sunup to sundown, Colt setting a hard, steady pace. He was pushing them, pushing her, and she knew why. He wanted to be out of Wyoming territory before anyone. A real, law-abiding marshal, or perhaps one of Grant's other, less official friends. Could even think to follow. At night, he would build a small, smokeless fire, and they would eat salt pork and hardtack, and drink bitter coffee. He would take the first watch, she the second. He had laid out 2 separate bedrolls on the first night, a respectful 10 feet apart. Lena had looked at the distance, a strange ache in her chest. It was not desire. It was loneliness. The battle was over, and the general was gone, leaving 2 soldiers who didn't know what to do next. On the 4th night, the temperature plummeted. A bitter, high plains wind howled down from the north, carrying the first premonition of winter. Lena, huddled in her thin blanket, was shaking so hard she couldn't keep her teeth from chattering. She was on watch, the stars bright and cold, the fire a pile of dead gray embers. She was too proud to go to him. He came to her. He didn't speak. He just sat down behind her, his back against the same rock, and pulled his own heavy blanket over both of them. He was a solid wall of heat, He wrapped his arms around her, not in a lover's embrace, but in a gesture of pure, practical warmth, and pulled her back against his chest. She leaned into him. She didn't mean to. Her body just did. It was the first time she had relaxed in, she realized, her entire life. "Go to sleep, Lena," he whispered, his voice a low rumble against her hair. "It's my watch. I got it." She slept. It was the deepest, most dreamless sleep she had ever known. They crossed into Colorado territory on the 7th day. The land changed. It grew meaner, but also more beautiful. The plains gave way to rolling foothills, the chalky cliffs to jagged granite. They were following a dry riverbed, the sand and stones a pale scar on the land. They passed ruined homes, a sod-buster's hovel. The roof caved in, a child's broken doll lying in the dirt, a burned-out ranch, the chimney standing alone like a tombstone. Lena would look at them, her face grim. Each one was a testament to failure, to a dream that had died of drought, or fire, or loneliness. This land, it ate people. It swallowed their hopes and spat out their bones. But then they would turn a corner, and the world would change. She saw a patch of wildflowers, bright purple and defiant yellow, blooming in the lee of a broken fence post. She saw a lone eagle, riding a high, invisible current. One afternoon, as they watered the horses at a trickling, algae-choked spring, Colt, who had been scouting ahead, came back. He didn't speak. He just held out his hand. In his rough, scarred palm was a single, perfect, wild plum. It was dark purple, almost black, and covered in a fine silver dust. She looked at him. "Found a thicket," he said, his voice quiet. "Up the draw." She took the plum. She bit into it. It was sweet. The juice ran down her chin, and for the first time since the trial, she laughed. It was a small, rusty sound. Colt watched her, and the hard lines around his eyes softened. He didn't smile, but he watched. They rode for 3 more weeks. They were no longer running. They were searching. Though neither of them had said it, they were looking for a place to stop. They had money. Colt had his pay from the ranch, and Lena had, with a fierce, cold anger, gone through Ezekiel's belongings in the carriage after he had been hauled away. She had found a false-bottomed box under his seat. It had been full. Not with Bibles, with money, tithes and donations from 100 believing towns. It was over $400. She had tried to give it to Colt. "It's blood money," she had said, her voice shaking. "It's your money," he had replied. "He took it from you. Take it back. What do I do with it? You buy your new life." He had said, so they were searching. Lena was the one who found it. They had come up over a high, pine-covered ridge, and the land fell away beneath them. It was a small valley, maybe 100 acres, with a clear, fast-running creek cutting through the middle of it. Cottonwood trees, their leaves already turning a bright, buttery yellow, followed the creek bed. The valley was sheltered on 3 sides by high, rocky walls. It was defensible. It was also beautiful. "Colt," she whispered. He had already seen it. He was scanning the ridges, his eyes marking the lines of sight, the access points, the places where the snow would drift. "It's good land," he said. It was high praise from him. "Good water, good grass, box canyon, safe." "No," Lena said, her voice quiet. He turned to her, a question in his eyes. "I mean, yes, it's safe. But that's not what I mean." She dismounted. Her legs were stiff. She walked to the edge of the ridge, looking down. She could see it. Not what was there, what could be there. A small, tight cabin, right there, just above the floodline, a paddock for the horses, a garden. "I'm tired of running. Colt," she said, her back to him. "I've been running my whole life, from my parents' graves, from Omaha, from him." She turned to face him. "I want to build something." He held her gaze. He knew what she was asking. This was not a request for a night's stop. This was a request for a life. "This is hard country, Lena. It'll fight you. The winter will try to kill you. The spring will flood you. The summer will bake you." "I know," she said. "So will you help me, or are you going to keep writing?" It was the second great, terrifying, honest question she had ever asked him. He did not speak. He just dismounted. He walked past her, down the rocky slope, toward the creek. He knelt by the water, scooped some into his hand, and drank. He stood, walked to a flat patch of land, and kicked at the dirt with his heel. He looked back up at her, a small, dark figure against the massive Colorado sky. "We'll need more timber than this," he called out. "The pine up here is good. We can drag it down. We should start the foundation before the first snow." Lena's knees almost buckled with relief. She sat down, right there on the rock, and buried her face in her hands. She was not crying. She was breathing. The work was the hardest thing she had ever done. Colt was a relentless, if silent, teacher. He knew, it seemed, how to do everything. He knew how to read the land. He knew how to fell a tree so it dropped exactly where he wanted. He knew how to notch logs, how to mix clay and grass for chinking, how to build a chimney that wouldn't smoke them out. And she worked. She, who had been raised to be a wife, who had been beaten into being a victim, found a strength she did not know she possessed. She swung an axe until her hands were a raw, blistered mass, and then she swung it some more. Colt had, without a word, taken her hands one night, cleaned them, and rubbed them with the same axle grease he had used in Chalk Ridge. She learned to haul. She learned to use a draw knife, peeling the bark from the pine logs. She learned to mix the mud for the chinking, the cold clay sucking at her arms up to the elbows. They worked from the first hint of light until they could no longer see. They ate, standing up. They fell into their separate bedrolls, too exhausted to speak, and slept the sleep of the dead. They were not building a cabin. They were building a fortress, and in that shared, brutal, silent work, their bond, the one forged in violence and shame, was reforged. It was tempered in sweat and pine sap. He would, without looking, reach out his hand, and she would place the hammer in it. She would be struggling with a log, and he would appear, his own log on his shoulder, and lift his end to help her. One afternoon, a cold, sharp wind blowing down the valley. She was on the half-finished roof, trying to nail down a split log shingle. Her hands were numb. The wind tore at her. She was cold. She was tired. And she was angry. She missed the nail. She hit her thumb. "Damn it!" she yelled, not in pain, but in pure, unadulterated rage. "Damn this whole God-forsaken land!" She threw the hammer. It spun, clattered on the roof, and fell to the ground. She sat down, her legs dangling over the edge, and put her head in her hands. Colt was on the ground, splitting wood. He stopped. He had seen it all. He expected her to cry. He expected her to quit. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Colt!" she yelled, her voice raw. "Throw me the damn hammer!" He looked at her, this small, furious woman sitting on his half-built roof, her hair a wild tangle, her face smeared with dirt. A slow, impossible-to-miss smile spread across his face. It was not the smile from the morning at the ranch. This one was real. It lit his gray eyes. It changed his entire face. He laughed. It was a low, rusty sound, like a sound of pure surprise. Lena stared at him. "What's so funny?" "Nothing," he said, the smile still on his face. He picked up the hammer. You're a hell of a woman. Lena." He tossed the hammer up to her. She caught it, and as she went back to work, she was, for the first time, smiling, too. The cabin was finished in 4 weeks. It was one room. It was not pretty. It was tight. It was solid, and the chimney drew. The first snows of winter began to dust the high peaks, but inside, with a fire roaring, it was warm. They had a table, 2 stools, and a single, wide bed, built by Colt from pine and rope. They had built a home. One afternoon, Colt was outside. She thought he was checking his trap lines. He came back at dusk, carrying a flat, wide piece of cottonwood bark. He had been carving. He had carved 3 letters into it, deep and sure. She expected Maddox. She expected Lena. She did not expect the single word he had carved. O-U-R-S, he held it out to her. She took it. Her rough, calloused fingers traced the letters. Ours. She looked at him. He was just Colt. His beard was untrimmed. His clothes were worn. His hands were scarred. And she loved him. The thought was so sudden, so pure. It stole her breath. It was not the desperate, clinging, broken thing she had felt in the barn. It was not the gratitude of being saved. It was this. It was the man who saw her, who worked with her, who had carved this word. The land, the cabin, this. He gestured. A clumsy, encompassing move. He took the piece of bark from her and nailed it to the door, on the inside. So we see it, he said, his voice rough. That night, they ate in silence. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. They were finished. They had done the work. And now, the thing they had been avoiding, the thing they had buried under logs and mud and exhaustion, was in the room with them. Colt cleared his throat. He did not look at her. He just stared into the fire. The bed, he said. I know, she said, her voice small. It's big enough for 2. If you want, we can put a curtain up, or I can sleep by the fire. It's your cabin. Lena, you get to say. He was giving her the choice. He was giving her back all the choices that had been stolen from her. She stood up. She walked to the fire. She stood next to him. She did not grab him. She did not kiss him. She just took his hand. His big, scarred, builder's hand. Let's go to bed. Colt, she said. It was the final love scene. It was the realest one. He was so careful with her. He, who had been so rough, so desperate, was now slow. He was intense. He was reverent. There were no bruises. There was no urgency. There was no shame. There was just quiet, trembling want. He undressed her, not with the deliberation of that first night, but with a tenderness that made her want to weep. He kissed her raw hands. He traced the old, faded scar on her arm with his lips. He kissed her split lip, which was finally almost healed. You are beautiful, he whispered, his voice thick. And when he was inside her, he was not a storm. He was the earth. He was solid, and he was home. He moved slow, his eyes locked on hers, and she did not flinch. She did not break. She met him. After, they lay tangled, the fire painting the room in soft orange light. She was in his arms, her head on his chest, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm under her ear. She was, for the first time, completely and utterly safe. She was also, she realized, a little bored. She smiled into his chest. Colt? What if I still want it rough sometimes? He went still. He tilted her chin up, his gray eyes searching hers in the firelight. He was looking for the ghost. He was looking for Ezekiel. He found only Lena. Her eyes were clear, and they were, just a little, teasing him. A slow smile. That smile spread across his face. He pressed his mouth to her neck, his beard scratching her, his teeth grazing her skin, just hard enough. Then you'll get it rough, he whispered, his voice a low, dark promise that sent a shiver straight through her, but never cruel. The story ends in the spring. The winter had been brutal. They had been snowed in for 2 months. They had survived on salt pork and what little meat Colt had trapped. They had survived on each other. They had learned every line, every scar, every story on each other's bodies. But the snow had melted. The creek was a roaring, angry flood. And the land, scoured clean, was green. Lena was kneeling in the dirt. The garden, their new battleground, was fenced. The dirt was rich and dark. She was planting seeds, corn, beans, squash. She had traded the merchant in Colorado Springs a 2-week ride for them. She had traded her pearl-handled revolver. She didn't need it anymore. She pressed a seed into the earth. The wind was picking up. That old, familiar, high plains sound. It whipped her hair around her face. She was not afraid of it. It was just the wind. On the porch of the cabin, the one with the word "ours" on the door. Colt stood. He was watching her. He was leaning against a post, his rifle slung loose. Habitual. A part of him. He was watching his wife. He had married her himself, with a ring he'd hammered out of a silver dollar. He watched her, a small, stubborn, fierce woman, kneeling in the dirt, planting a future. And Colt Maddox, the killer, the silent shadow, the man who had been 15 for his entire life, finally smiled. And there was no sorrow in it. Thank you for listening to this story. We love that you found us, and we hope you enjoyed this tale. Please let us know where you are listening from. We love to see how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West so you never miss a new chapter. And finally, share your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Lena and Colt's journey? We read every one.